All right. Well, this video is basically kind of a thank you to SciManDan for taking the time to look at my video and make comments on it. And also a little bit of a response to him. I don't want to keep harassing the guy or anything, but there were a couple of points that he made which I want to respond to. And also in general terms. Overall, though, I'm very grateful to Dan. He's a very polite man. And he was quite gracious at the end as well of his video. So yeah, thanks. That was really welcome. I appreciated your points. I'll go through them a little bit because I was honestly genuinely interested in it. And I will address all that in a minute. However, I also wanted to first get something else out of the way. Dan and I are clearly quite different people in terms of how we deal with other idiotic human beings, but I think that we can at least agree that we have definitely discovered one thing scientifically, empirically, that he will probably be too polite to agree completely with me directly, but I think that he wouldn't disagree with me too much in saying that there are just as many stupid fucking idiots in the I fucking love science camp as there are in the flat earth camp. And I had the pleasure of receiving quite a lot of those from his channel. Now, I want to make a couple of things clear to those idiots. Nothing ever becomes clear to idiots. You can repeat the same thing 100 times. They don't listen, they don't learn. They're basically human bugs and should be treated as such. But there are some people that are on the edge and some people can learn and so on. So let me be absolutely clear. Now, I don't care, okay, whether you know this, whether you agree with this, whether it upsets you or not. It's a fact that I've got an IQ that, roughly speaking, 1 in 10,000 people has. Okay, that's just a fact. I don't care if you believe it. I don't care if you don't believe it. It doesn't matter to me. So, unless your IQ starts to hit the at least 125 zone, right? You've got to be above 125 to be able to even understand what the hell I'm saying and follow half of what I'm saying, right? Most people don't have an IQ over 125. So that's not your fault, and that's not I'm not saying that to say, oh, you're too stupid. But in a sense, you kind of are in some ways, right? But I don't mind that. A stupid person or a person that can't quite grasp what I'm saying, that says, look, I don't agree with you because I don't understand where you get this from that. And there were some comments like that. There were some people that made comments that are like, I don't see how you can jump from this to that. And you can tell, they're probably not astronomers, they're probably not maths geniuses or anything. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I've got no problem with somebody saying, I don't understand what you're saying, or what you're saying sounds weird to me, and I don't agree with you. Just on the basis of that. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. I've got no problem with that. What I do have a problem with are the following, and it's a long list, so pay attention. 1, stupid idiots who pretend to know more than what they know. In other words, the morons that say, you need extraordinary evidence to make extraordinary claims. Listen up, fuckfaces. Did you not get that my premise is based simply on Mars could support life? There is enough evidence for that to make that a real possibility. It had running water, like flowing water. It had potentially an oxygen-rich atmosphere, and it had a magnetosphere. That's it. Done. Okay? You now have the 3 elements that would allow intelligent life to live there. Now, you can say, oh, well, we don't know it did or didn't. That's another argument. Argument number 1 is made. The evidence is there. It exists. You can argue about the probabilities. You can say, oh, but the probability that it was enough oxygen to make it okay for people to live on there is only X% or Y%. Doesn't matter. The fact is, it's there. It exists. That possibility is there. And guess what, morons? All the little virtue signalers that want to, oh, I'm a SciManDan fan. Guess what? SciManDan, who's not an idiot, didn't disagree with any of those premises. He said, yes, it's possible that it had an oxygen atmosphere. It's possible that he said it definitely had flowing water, and possibly even still has flowing water now. Now that's important, and I'll come back to that. the point is, SciManDan did not disagree about these possibilities. He might disagree with the probability of all of them being good enough to support, humanoid life. And that's fine, but the evidence is there. So the morons that use the word evidence incorrectly, you're banned. You're banned. You're too stupid to talk. You're too stupid to have an argument. So you're not going to be on my channel. The idiots that pretend to know and don't. In other words, they pretend to they repeat some soundbite they heard somewhere, and they're actually showing up what an idiot they are. And there's one guy like that. I gave a long response to be like 7 or 8 points, proving that he's a liar, he's stupid, he doesn't understand the concepts that are being discussed. Those guys get banned. So you will get banned. And I don't care if you scream to the world that, oh, he bans anyone that disagrees with him. No, you morons. There are people that disagreed with me quite openly, quite thoroughly. In fact, they disagreed on everything I said, but they were polite about it, and that's it. They can stay. You idiots cannot stay, will not stay. I am not a polite Englishman, all right? Think of me more a little bit as a crusading, crazy Venetian. I will swipe you from my channel as soon as you do something that disturbs me slightly. It's not a democracy. So let's just that very clear up front. Right, now, to get back to the SciManDan stuff, because as I've said before, he's a lot cleverer than I am with video, and I'm not. So what I've made is I've made a little list of timestamps where I want to address something that SciManDan said. So at about 2 minutes 59, he very politely and kindly states that I probably meant to say 78% nitrogen and not 98% nitrogen, and he's absolutely correct. And that's very kind of him to not pick on that as being me being an idiot. I misspoke. I misspoke because in my head my head is always thinking 3-4 things at once, which is not always helpful. And I was thinking, well, the 21% oxygen plus the 78%, 21% oxygen, 78% of nitrogen, there's about 98%. It's really 98 something. And that leaves another percent and a bit for, rare gases and so on. And so I said 98 instead of 78. Dan understood that and just let it slide. He also let slide another point, which I had warned him about though, which I misspoke again because I was speaking from memory. I don't really plan these videos, as you can probably tell. And I misspoke about the retrograde motion of Phobos. Now, the retrograde motion of Phobos is apparent. It's not real. So again, I misrepresented that. But I did put it in the notes of the video, and I did tell Dan I made that mistake. And he, again, he didn't say anything about that, so that's very good of him. Now, I want to get onto the actual 3 points about the oxygen, the water, and the magnetosphere. On the oxygen, Dan agreed, yeah, it's possible. He made a comment about 10% oxygen would not be enough to have higher mental function and so on. And it's fine. I don't disagree with him at all. And, he made the point that even if the oxygen percentage was 30%, you wouldn't blow up by lighting a match. And he's right about that. No argument with him. What I found a little bit, let's say the most negative thing I found about Dan's arguments were he took some things rather quite literally, where it was quite obvious, I thought, that I was making a generic point. So what I was saying is, look, whether it's 10% or 30%, it's somewhere in that range. It's possible it's somewhere in that range, so good enough for human life, and yeah, the likelihood is that if people were to live there, then it probably has to be, closer to the 20-21% than the 10 or the 30 or whatever. But my point was there was enough oxygen there probably to support life. And Dan doesn't say that's not the case. He might disagree with me on the likelihood that that percentage of oxygen was good enough to have intelligent people live on it and think normally and whatever. He might disagree on that, but he doesn't disagree on the point that it could exist. Similarly, he doesn't disagree at all on the water, the fact that flowing water used to be on Mars. This is quite an important point because Dan made a comment that there may be flowing water on Mars now. That's very important because according to NASA scientists or whatever, Mars has got a 7 millibar atmospheric pressure. Now, 7 millibar is not enough to keep flowing water on the surface. So, and I do believe that Mars potentially does indeed have flowing water on the surface. And there's some photographs that suggest there may be little lakes and so on. I haven't investigated that particularly very deeply, but I was pleasantly surprised by Dan stating that. So it made me understand that, you know, to a certain extent, Dan also probably has a certain position to safeguard a little bit. And he doesn't know me, we don't know each other. I may appear like a crazy bastard, so I kind of understands that he would be a little bit conservative. But the fact that he mentioned flowing water on Mars today as a possibility shows me that he is, you know, open to scientific investigation of certain things. And while I expect that his standard for proof or accepting a theory is probably more rigid than mine, I think that, you know, if we had enough time, if Dan and I lived next door to each other and we had a beer every couple of, you know, every so often, or, well, I don't really drink beer, but anyway, you know what I mean. If we spend time talking about this stuff, I think that we're not as far apart as, you know, these videos would seem to suggest. The other point that I found, you know, that he agreed with was the magnetosphere definitely used to exist. Now we come to the points where we sort of disagree. He says that having oxygen, water, and a magnetosphere is not evidence that intelligent life lived on there. And I absolutely agree with that. It isn't. However, it creates the possibility that life could have been sustained there. Now that is now a real possibility. It's possible. In other words, if you have oxygen, water, and magnetosphere, life could potentially now exist on that planet. That's where I'm going with that. My evidence for the life on Mars having been intelligent is essentially composed of maybe 3 parts. One is the face and other objects in Cydonia. Now, I did not cover this in great detail, and Dan did skip, which I thought was a little bit, you know, a little bit naughty of him, let's say. But I understand it was a long video and he did a really good job otherwise, so I'm not going to complain about it too much. But he completely skipped over the points that I mentioned about a guy called Mark Carlotto. Now, if you're a young one, you don't know who Mark Carlotto is. If you were in your 20s, 30s and interested in astronomy in the early to middle 90s, you wouldn't be able to not know who Mark Carlotto is. I have met Mark personally a number of times. I have communicated with him by email. He is absolutely a scientist. I've made other videos about Mark. I don't know that I've put them up. I've made a couple of videos that I was going to put up later once I've got the whole series done. Mark created software that for the military that analyzes satellite imagery to find artificial objects that have been camouflaged, and it works spectacularly well. He is probably one of the foremost scientists on the planet as far as interpreting satellite images goes. And Mark Carlotto agrees with me that the face on Mars and the surrounding objects are of artificial nature. There is something else. Dan presented his video as if I was just relying on the 1976 photograph of the face and nearby objects. That's absolutely not true. In fact, the thing that convinced Mark and I that the face was an artificial construct were the later images, particularly the cat box image, which very conveniently, I think, Dan fails to mention why it was called the cat box image. It was called the cat box image because it was taken at a particularly weird latitude. It was reversed, and it was the contrast on it was lowered so that it looked like a washed out bit. And they also took the image when there was a little bit of cloud cover on it, which is another interesting point, that if you have cloud cover on Mars at that latitude. So, you know, there's a lot more, what I'm saying, to the face on Mars, the image of the face on Mars. And no, I am aware of all the faces on Mars images. You'll notice that Dan in his video showed up the one to 2001. I'm aware of that one. I'm aware of the one before that one. So in fact, it was the later images that convinced Mark that they were artificial objects. And I agreed with him. I mean, in fact, I emailed him and I said, look, what do you think? Because as far as I can tell, these things are absolutely artificial. And he said, there's no doubt about it in my mind anymore. Now, you must understand that Mark had done the original work that proved scientifically in a completely objective methodology, which he has done papers on. I believe you can still find them online. They're actual scientific papers on that nobody has refuted. The maths in it is ironclad. To something like 98% probability, the face and nearby objects were artificial. When he had already done that work and presented it, I met him for the first time. We went to dinner. I invited him to dinner. We all ate together, him and at the second meeting, Professor McDaniel was there as well. But when it was just Mark and I asked him, look, just between us, you know, he was a scientist. He had a certain position to hold. I didn't. And I've never cared about that stuff anyways. I don't care where I work. I've been fired from places for telling the truth. So, you know, it's never bothered me. But I didn't want to affect his life in any way or whatever. And I said, look, it'll die with me, but just between us, what do you think? And he said, I don't have an opinion. I'm just doing the work, and that's what the work shows. A real scientist. Later, when the later images came out, he told me, no, it's absolutely artificial. I still never mentioned what he said to me for another 20 years. It was only much later that I contacted him again by email, I think, and I said, you know, I've never revealed what you told me just because I didn't know how it might affect your life or whatever. And he said, I don't care anymore, dude. Just, you know, if you want to say that I agree with you and that I believe it's artificial, go right ahead, because I've done my work. I don't care. You know, and we're similar in that respect, in that Mark is a scientist. He doesn't really care for the fame or whatever. He did some papers. Hoagland promoted Mark Carlotto a lot for his own ends, and Hoagland is a journalist, and those of you that know me know what I think about journalists in general, and Hoagland is no exception. But you know, Mark Carlotto is a scientist. He also invented for HP, I believe it was, a method of storing data on crystals, which would absolutely revolutionize data storage, because you can store information on crystals on different planes of it, and they have multiple planes. And it's something like you could store like terabytes of data on, like, you know, little crystals. Interestingly enough, the US military already 20 years ago had a chip that worked purely with light. So an optical chip that was about the size of a mouse, roughly about this size. And it outperformed Cray supercomputers of the day. What's this stuff being used for? Nobody knows. But the military has had this stuff for a long time, and Carlotto's project on the crystal data storage was again disappeared. You know, so anybody that doesn't, you know, that says, oh, who are you talking about? You're saying that he's the foremost imaging guy in the world. What? Because his mom says so? No, you're an idiot. You are an idiot. You're an ignorant idiot. So if you come on there making a comment like, oh, you're just talking about some weird guy who's taking images and you think that he's the guru, you don't know what you're talking about. You get banned because you're opening your mouth ignorantly, arrogantly, and stupidly. You add nothing to the conversation and you only take away from objective facts. So you will be banned. But SciManDan didn't address Mark Carlotto. And I think that's a huge gap. You should. If you're going to discuss this anymore. I'm not asking Dan to revisit this. You know, if he wants, I'll let him know that I've made this. But, you know, contrary to what a lot of people say, that like, oh, you trying to use SciManDan to boost your channel. I don't care. I'm not monetized. I don't do this for money. I don't make a living off my books. I don't make a living off videos. And I expect that I'll eventually be banned from YouTube pretty soon anyway, so it doesn't matter. You know, there's contingencies. I've got all the videos saved and they'll go up on another platform, and so I'm doing this for a hobby because it's fun. So now the one objection that Dan had to my oceans in the northern hemisphere theory was that he thinks that the reason that the impact craters are disappeared in the northern side is because of lava plains. But There are lava plains near and around the Tharsis Bulge because, the Hellas Basin that hit on one side of the planet nearly broke Mars apart. It cracked it open like an egg. That's what Valles Marineris is. It's a crack that runs for like 4,000 kilometers, 7 to 11 kilometers deep. It wasn't done by water. That was a tectonic plate crack. And that would stop the magnetosphere. Now, when I made my video, I'm talking loosely for largely a lay audience. So when SciManDan took me up on the fact that he says, an asteroid impact wouldn't have the same result as hammering a magnet. Yes, okay, Dan, I know that, but don't assume I'm an idiot. I expect you to understand what I'm saying is an impact of that size that cracks the planet open, that has 4 shield volcanoes on the opposite side pop up. That's going to affect the core of the planet. And no, I don't agree with you that because it was smaller, it cooled quicker, and then it stopped spinning. Mars was destroyed by these asteroid impacts. The water flood plains, absolutely created by water, not lava, water flood evidence is pretty spectacular throughout Mars. And that really only happens as a result of a violent event, such as an asteroid impact. So, sorry, Dan, but while I understand what you're talking about in terms of the lava plains, I don't believe that the evidence of a lava plains going only over the northern hemisphere is at all supported. The theory of an ocean in the northern hemisphere is supported by the various altitudes and so on. And so I'm going to stick to my guns on that one. There is another point at about 7 minutes and 40 seconds in or so. That's when Dan talks about the cooling of the core because Mars is a smaller planet, and I'm saying no, it's asteroid impacts that finish that off. Then there is a bizarre point that I think are just before 9 minutes in, where Dan says that he's never heard of asteroid size being related to the age of the impacts, and yeah, neither have I. But that's not what I said, Dan, and I explained that at about 9 minutes 30 seconds in. I explained what I meant. The age of the impacts is relative. We do not have an absolute age of when that happened. Now, you're talking about 3-4 billion years ago. I get it, but I think there is a preponderance of evidence that shows that because you have a 10 to 100 times the number of impacts on the southern hemisphere than you do on the northern, and I don't accept your lava theory wiping everything out only on the northern hemisphere. Sorry, I don't. It doesn't make sense. I believe that the theory of the northern ocean is a lot more likely. What I will try and dig this up at some point because I don't remember where I read it. It probably might be in my book as well. I don't remember. I wrote it 23 years ago. But what I meant what I was getting at, and I think I tried to explain this at 9 minutes and a half in, is there are statistical analysis that you can do on the asteroids impacts on Mars, and people have done this. And what seems to be that the evidence is quite strong that the bigger impacts, the Hellas and the Argyll planitia, are some of the most recent events that happened. The smaller crater impacts tend to be very often, you've got lots of little impact craters that are half covered by a slightly bigger one. Now, yes, of course, there are crater impacts in the middle of Hellas Basin which show they happen after the Hellas Basin. But I'm talking about statistical analysis of the whole planet's asteroid impact patterns. And as a whole, as a generic trend, it's going to be a bell curve. Yes, you're going to have outliers. Yes, you're going to have asteroid impacts, small ones inside the Hellas Basin. Of course you will, because it's a huge area. But as a generic concept, the big impacts happened last, which is absolutely in line with my idea of orbital bombardment of asteroids. Then, to be fair to Dan, I absolutely am sure that he has no knowledge about anti-gravity technology, and to be fair to him, he skipped over that part. He did not argue that there is no such thing as anti-gravity or whatever. I believe he's probably ignorant of the massive proof that exists that anti-gravity technology exists. It's quite heavily classified, but it's absolutely real. There is a lot of evidence of that. There is a video of it. I've got the patent numbers of Thomas Townsend Brown's flying discs in my book. So, you know, there's a lot of documentation. There's a lot of proof that anti-gravity technology is available. And we know for a fact that the US Naval Research Laboratories have been researching this at least since 1954, when Thomas Townsend Brown basically gave the US Naval Research Laboratories all his information. If you haven't researched the stuff, if you don't know about anti-gravity, the concept of anti-gravity seems absolutely absurd to you. I get that, but it's not. You're just ignorant of a lot of scientifically valid things that you just don't know about because they don't talk about it in school or whatever. I get it, but that doesn't mean it's not there, okay? So, as I said then, let's leave the anti-gravity part aside. You're just going to have to accept it as an axiom for a moment, you know, pretend as if, okay? I accept that you probably don't believe it, and that's fine, but you are ignorant on the subject. So pretend as if anti-gravity technology exists. Within accepting that, just as for argument's sake, my theory absolutely holds water. I do accept what Dan said, that it's too speculative for him. I get it. I accept what he says, given what I think he knows. But I would suggest that he maybe look into anti-gravity technology a bit more. It's a bit of a rabbit hole, Dan, and it might make you join the ranks of the tinfoil-hatted people. We also, at 15 seconds past the 13-minute mark, he says something that I think it's funny, so I think you should watch it, because I think I say in my video something like, you know, Dan, shoot holes as best you can in these points, and he comes back on and he says, I'll do my best, buddy. And it's the kind of humor I love him for. He's great for that. Now, he also goes on to talk about the phase being a natural thing and the asteroid impacts being natural, and he skips over the Phobos and Deimos stuff. Again, a little bit naughty. And he completely avoids the Mar-Carlotto stuff. This is important because the Mar-Carlotto stuff absolutely shows that the face and the pyramids nearby are very, 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 very likely to be artificial objects. And it does so. It's not, you know, a 2-minute conversation. Mar-Carlotto's written a number of papers on it, and he has updated his information as new information came out. So there is no one on the planet that has been able to disprove anything that Maccarlotto says on this stuff. And he is one of the foremost imaging people on Earth. So I'm sorry, Dan, but there's somebody that has a lot more scientific credibility than you do, and he agrees with me. So, you know, I'm not one to appeal to authority, but I am one to appeal to actual good science. And you can find Mark's papers online, so I invite you to look at them if you care to, since Mars is close to your heart too. I hope that you do. And again, the Phobos and Deimos are very strange satellites of Mars, and I talk about that in my book and in the video as well. Lastly, you know, the evidence, so in other words, the evidence for intelligent life is the fact that we have artificial objects on there, what are most likely artificial objects, the fact that the destruction of Mars, the orbital bombardment, as far as I can tell, my ocean theory is superior to Dan's lava theory, and the statistical analysis of asteroid impacts seems to indicate that you have the precise pattern you would expect if you have people on Mars and people off Mars in a war where they're flinging big rocks at each other using anti-gravity devices. I accept that you have to assume the anti-gravity devices for now, but if you put that as a, you know, for argument's sake, possibility, I think, you know, that you start to see that the theory does hold water. I also did not say that all the asteroid impacts on Mars happen in a 2-year period. I don't know where Dan gets that from. Again, I'm talking about stochastic methodology of asteroid impact analysis, Dan. So I don't know if you genuinely misunderstood that. If you were, I will give you the benefit of the doubt. I think you possibly genuinely are so used to dealing with crackpot crazy people that you just assume that when I said, it might have happened anything between days and a couple of years, that I meant that it all happened in 2 years. I didn't mean that at all, Dan. So, I'm sure you didn't mean to misrepresent me. I think you're just possibly used to dealing with crazy people so much that you just perhaps assumed I was saying a really stupid thing, which I didn't say. But overall, and right at the end, he also said I raised some interesting points, so that was very gracious of him. And I appreciate the fact that you took the time, Dan, so thank you very much. You are a very interesting guy, and I honestly believe we're not as far apart on this topic as you may think we are currently. I think if we had the chance to spend time together, and as I'm talking, I'm looking at the map of Mars that I've got on my wall, and I was doing a series of videos on this topic anyway. So at some point, hopefully, they will all come out, either here or somewhere else, and there'll be a lot more information. But as a last point, I also want to, again, remind all the idiots that come and criticize. I have written a 500-page book that took 3 years to write, and then I've updated it with other information into 2014 that took another few months to put together. So you're not going to get every little detail of my theory in a 30-minute video or an hour video or even a 6-hour video, okay? If you are interested, buy the book. I'm not trying to sell you the book. I don't care. Like I said, the money I get from my books is enough to buy me a cup of coffee now and then. It's irrelevant to me. I didn't write those books to become rich and famous. My book's been plagiarized by Graham Hancock. I didn't bother suing him because he apologized to me in person, okay? And I have witnesses to that. So Graham, don't go talking shit. But I do this stuff because it interests me. I don't really care what anybody else thinks about it. It is interesting, and it is entertaining, and it is genuinely fun to come across somebody who is intelligent, who has a background in astronomy and science, and that is open enough to consider crazy theories. Be willing to shoot them down. I don't expect Dan to be, I expect Dan to be the devil's advocate as far as, the tinfoil hat stuff goes. And I'm a little bit more, open-minded perhaps, or, maybe even too open-minded something. And I agree with Dan that, I see a pattern, I put certain things together, and then I speculate on the basis of those patterns. So if we're going to hold me to the 95% probability or higher scientific standard, I could see that my theory probably wouldn't hit that, but I am not holding myself to that standard for a very simple reason. That standard is sometimes limiting and sometimes quite arbitrary. Even more interestingly, that standard is now followed by almost no scientists. Let's say the majority of scientists no longer hold that standard. A majority of peer-reviewed papers today are not reproducible, do not produce repeatable results, which means they are either designed badly, statistically incompetent, or fraudulent. So, what everybody out there that says, it's not peer-reviewed, me flipping a coin is currently more likely to give the right answer than trusting a peer-reviewed paper at random. So I'm sorry, but no, unless you've shown your work, checked your work, proven your work, you're not, I don't give a crap whether it's peer-reviewed or not. I want to see the maths. I want to see the data. I want to see the raw data, okay? And that's how you do science. Now, basically that's my point, and I shall keep banning without mercy any idiots that did not listen to the first 5 minutes and follow instructions. You're absolutely welcome to disagree with me, be polite, be civil, present your case. Or even not present your case. You can disagree with me politely and you won't get banned. You can disagree with me making your points, and that's fine as long as you have actually listened to my points first. So don't misrepresent me. If you start to argue against points I didn't make, or you start to argue against the opposite of the points I made, or you start to argue without fairly presenting my side of the argument as I presented it, not as you wish it was, you will be banned immediately. I cannot stand people who can't be bothered to listen and then pontificate as if they had. You will not survive. You will not get an argument, but you will just be outright banned. Just letting you know. So yeah, that's it. Thanks again, Dan. Thanks to the people who were somewhat civil. There were a few of them. And there was a great mass grave increase in the gammas that got slaughtered without any further ado. Again, just remember, guys, I'm not a polite Englishman. I have no problem banning people for the slightest thing that upsets me. And the thing that upsets me the most is idiots that speak without having bothered to listen. You will get banned outright. I don't care what you think of me. I do not care at all. If you think I'm some crazy cook who just bans people because he can't handle it, his ego can't take it. And if you do believe that, I suggest you go elsewhere. It's a big internet, go somewhere else. If you come here, be respectful or get put in the mass grave with all the gammas. Okay, that's about it. And yeah, I don't know, if Dan does respond to this, that would be cool. And if at any point, Dan, you actually want to discuss this, whether on video or not, I'm quite happy to have a conversation with you without it ever going public. You're one of the few people that I think genuinely means well, is honest, and probably would give my ideas a fair shake. And you may have some good points I didn't think of. You haven't come up with any in the video that you made that I wasn't already aware of. But you never know. You know, it was only a short video. And I know you're quite knowledgeable and you love astronomy. And we both love the planet Mars. So I sincerely hope that at some point maybe we meet up and discuss this further. But if not, that's okay. Thanks for the time you've given me. That's cool too. All right. Good night.